As you are seated, we turn to our scripture this morning as we continue our series on 1 Corinthians 13. So we begin with 1 Corinthians verse 6. Hear now God's word to us. It, meaning love, does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. And then Paul writes to the church in Ephesus in chapter 4, beginning at verse 15, and I'm going to go through verse 17. But speaking the truth in love, we must grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and knit together by every ligament with which it is equipped, as each part is working properly, promotes the body's growth in building itself up in love. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So you remember that story about George Washington, right? When he's about 6 years old, he gets a axe as a gift, and he goes down and he chops down his father's cherry tree. And his dad's not real happy about it. He finds out what's happened and confronts young George. And what's George's reply? I cannot tell a lie. I did it. It's one of the great American stories about honesty. Or it would be if it was true. It turns out that iconic tale about honesty is actually a lie. Yeah. But that's the epitome of our struggle with honesty. We say we value honesty, we want honesty in our relationships, but then when it comes down to it, it's kind of easier to be dishonest. It's easier to be nice than to be honest. Just kind of is in our memory of George Washington. It's easier to lie about being honest. Of course, there's a lot of things in our lives that we do want honesty in. When you take the car to the mechanic and he tells you, oh, your car's running great, couldn't be better, you'll have no problems with it, and then later on that afternoon, your brakes give out and you almost get in an accident, and you go back to your mechanic and say, hey, you told me my car was fine. He said, oh, yeah, about that. Well, yeah, I knew about your brakes, but, I didn't want you to be upset at me or angry. I didn't really know the right words to say, so I just didn't mention it. When it comes to our car, we want the truth. And then if we go to our doctor, we want our doctors to be honest, right? We don't want to go in for our annual physical and the doctor say, oh, you're looking great, couldn't be better, you've got the body of a 20-year-old, you'll be just fine. And then the next day you end up having a heart attack because your arteries are 90% clogged. And when you go back to your doctor and ask her, well, what happened? She says, oh, well, I didn't want to make you mad or get upset at me. And, I didn't think it's what you wanted to hear. So I just told you what you wanted to hear. When it comes to our bodies, we want the truth. We want the truth about a lot of things, except when it comes to us. We don't really want to hear the truth about us. Because then we might hear about our faults and our failures and our shortcomings. We definitely don't want to tell other people about the truth about them, because it's uncomfortable and it's difficult and it's stressful, and what if they get upset at me? It's kind of like, okay, in the workplace, let's say you have a problem with a coworker for whatever reason. And so in the morning, they stop by your desk and say, hey, how you doing? At that point, you have a choice. You can either say fine and go on with your day, and they would go on with their day, and you wouldn't have to confront them or go through any misunderstandings or any amount of time or energy involved. Or you could say, there's something I've been meaning to talk to you about. Do you have a few minutes at lunch today? And then take that time to talk to them about whatever the problem is. All right, now be honest. Which one would you do? It's easier to be nice than to be honest. And so we come to our passage today in 1 Corinthians 13, verse 6, as we're talking about love. And it says, love rejoices in the truth. Rejoices in the truth. Love dares to speak the truth. And that's what I want you to remember today. Love dares to speak the truth. Jesus spoke the truth. In fact, some of his times his words are very surprising to us. So when he talks about an enemy, he refers to them as having great faith. And yet, he tells his disciples, "O ye of little faith." Or for the hypocrites, he says, "You snakes." The Pharisees. He calls them hypocrites and snakes. And yet, he also says, "Father, forgive them." His own disciples, he rebuked over and over again, and yet he loved them compassionately and sacrificially. And probably the most notorious example of that is an interaction with Peter, his kind of number one star student, Peter. So here Jesus is talking about how he has to die and go to the cross and in 3 days rise again. And Peter said, no. You're not going to do that. You can't do that. Heaven forbid that happens to you, Jesus. And what did Jesus say to Peter? "Get behind me, Satan, because you are a stumbling block to me, and your mind is not on the concerns of God, but the concerns of people." Okay, now that's pretty harsh words, don't you think? But it was the truth. It was the truth, and Jesus loved Peter enough to tell him the truth. Because love dares to speak the truth. Paul was a master at this. All the letters that we have were all about speaking the truth in love. He confronts them, he chides them, he challenges them about the behavior and what they're doing. And we find that no different in this letter to the church in Ephesus this morning. And they needed to hear about speaking the truth in love. So here's what Paul writes to them. He says, "But speaking the truth in love, we must grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ." Speaking the truth in love is the way we grow into Jesus. Why? Because Jesus is the truth. John says Jesus was full of grace and truth. So if we want to become a better disciple, if we want to grow in our relationship with Jesus, then we have got to learn how to speak the truth in love. And we need some help with that. Because it's hard. It's uncomfortable. And sometimes it's even counterintuitive. So Rick Warren has outlined kind of 4 lessons that we can learn from Paul's letters to the churches that he has loved so much. And by the way, on the back of your bulletin, there's a little area for sermon notes. If you want to jot any of this down, you're welcome to. The first thing we can learn is to check our motives. Check your motives if you want to confront someone with the truth. Because what Paul writes is he says, everything we do, dear friends, is for your benefit. He's always thinking of the people he's writing to, wanting to benefit them. And then what he says later on in Ephesians, in that same chapter, he says, "Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs." That is the whole purpose of speaking the truth in love, to benefit the other person, to build up someone else. It's a way of looking out for their best interest and a way to help them. And that's why you need both sides of this equation. That's why we need to speak the truth and do it in love. Because you may know some people that speak the truth, but there's not a lot of love involved. They kind of aim the truth at you, right between the eyes, instead of just tell it to you. I mean, yeah, the truth can hurt, but it's not meant to maim and destroy and kill people. And so we have truth, but it's got to be wrapped up in love. But the opposite is true too. If you have love without truth, it's equally disastrous. Because if you have love without truth, you have a relationship without honesty. And without honesty, there's a lack of trust, and that lack of trust will cause great pain. A relationship will never grow if there's no truth in it. So we need both sides of this equation. Speak the truth and to do it in love. When you realize someone is destroying themselves because of an addiction, when you encounter a child who has a difficult home life, maybe even a dangerous home life, when you see the same woman over and over again, but she has different bruises on her arm every time and she doesn't want to talk about it. Love dares to start the conversation, to ask, to care, to reach out, to get involved. But let me tell you what speaking the truth is not. Speaking the truth is not an excuse to tell everyone every negative opinion you've ever had of them. Just want to clarify that. Speaking the truth in love is not a way to dictate to someone how to live their lives or raise their kids. Speaking the truth in love is not a way to dump all your emotional baggage on someone so you can feel better. So check your motives. Check your motives and make sure that the reason you want to tell someone this truth is for their benefit and to build them up. Second thing that we can learn from Paul is to plan your presentation. And Paul did this. And so we read again in Corinthians what he wrote to them. He said, "For I wrote you out of great distress and anguish of heart and with many tears, not to grieve you, but to let you know the depth of my love for you." When he sat down and wrote these letters, he was in anguish. He was distressed. He was crying. He was so passionate about these people that he loved so much. Paul did not sit down and write a quick reactionary flaming email to someone. You've seen those emails, right? I mean, not that any of us have ever done them, but you're angry about something, you read something, and so you bang out all your anger and frustration on the keyboard. You hit the send button without really thinking through your reaction. There's actually studies being done now about the harm that these kinds of emails are causing in communities, in workplaces, in friendships. It's the same thing on Facebook and social media. Speaking the truth in love is not done through a Facebook post. Speaking the truth in done is not done through a reactionary knee-jerk email. Think it through. Plan what you want to say to this person, and say it with love. But once you do plan it, your presentation, don't sit on it for another month. Share it now. Just do it. It's going to be a challenge and maybe difficult, and so there's no point worrying about it and letting it hang on. Just share it. Do it as soon as you feel it's appropriate. So when you love someone enough to have some of these difficult conversations, figure out exactly what you want to say, how you're going to say it to them, and when the best time is. And then just go ahead and do it. Don't wait any longer. Third thing that we can learn from Paul is to give affirmation to people. Let them know what your motives are. Tell them, listen, I love you too much to see you keep doing this to yourself. I care about you. I'm here for you. I will support you through this. Tell them in your own words, because they need to hear it. They need to know that you're saying these difficult things because you care about them, because of your relationship with them. So love dares to speak the truth, but first gives an affirmation, letting someone know what those motives are. And finally, the last one, number 4, after you've checked your motives and planned your presentation and you give an affirmation, the hardest one of all, be willing to risk rejection. Because the truth is, we don't know exactly how people are going to take these difficult conversations. Paul wrote, again, to the church in Corinth, listen, I know I distressed you greatly with my letter. And although I felt awful at the time, I don't feel at all bad now that I see how it turned out. The letter upset you, but only for a while. And you were jarred into turning things around. You let the distress bring you to God. And that's what I was hoping for in the first place when I wrote the letter. So Paul knew that these were difficult words to write and say. He knew they might reject them, but in the end, it helped turn them toward God. They needed to be said. They needed to be confronted, and that was a way in which they realized what was happening. But we've got to be willing to risk rejection, because if we speak the truth enough times, it will happen. Because as good as your intentions are, nobody wants to hear about their own faults. Nobody wants to hear they've hurt you. Nobody wants to hear that they're being self-destructive or harmful to somebody else. But it's a risk that's worth taking. We have to risk rejection. And it happened to Jesus. I mean, Jesus faced rejection in a lot of different ways, but in one such case, he was actually talking to a rich young ruler. Now imagine the money, the power, the influence that he could have had in Jesus' movement. And yet Jesus spoke the truth to him and said, you know what? Go and sell everything you have and give it to the poor, and then come follow me. And the rich young ruler couldn't take the truth. And he went away sad. But it was the truth, and Jesus needed to tell him that. And sometimes people will embrace what you say. They will say, thank you. I needed to hear that. Thank you for your courage and letting me know. I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't realize that. I'll try to do better next time. Sometimes it can be that turning point for that person and make all the difference in the world. It did for David. King David, back in the Old Testament, he and Bathsheba, some things happened, not good. And no one wanted to say anything. I mean, you speak the truth to King David, he'll probably kill you. So no one wanted to tell David that what he was doing was wrong, that it was a sin, that he needed to repent. Until a year later, when the prophet Nathan comes along and says, you know what, David, I got a story for you. He thought through his presentation. He was doing it for David's benefit. And he said, so there's a story about a poor guy who only had one lamb, and then there's a rich guy that came and took the lamb and killed it, and David's like, well, that's not right, and that's not fair, and that person shouldn't have done that. They should be punished. And Nathan looked right at him and said, you are that man. Love dares to speak the truth. Who will you be a Nathan to this week? Because you see, our culture is going to try and let you off the hook. The culture says someone else's life, that's none of your business. If someone wants to destroy their life with alcohol, it's their choice. Don't get involved. It's messy. I mean, kind of like in the words of Billy Joel, right? Go ahead with your own life. Leave me alone. We all have the right to make our own choices and do whatever we want. And plus, you might upset them. It's really none of your business. It's inconvenient. It's stressful. It's uncomfortable. Yeah. But if you don't say something, it's not love. Groucho Marx once said that the secret of life is honesty and fair dealing. And if you can fake that, you got it made. And a lot of people do fake it. But what if we didn't? What if we were honest with love in all our relationships? What would our marriages look like? What would our friendships look like? What would our workplaces look like? What would our churches look like? What would our neighborhoods look like if we dare to speak the truth in love? I want to leave you with a contrast of two very different but very famous sayings about truth. The first comes from a movie called A Few Good Men. Some of you have been waiting for this quote all time. She's going to speak on truth. She's got to say this quote, right? So Tom Cruise is the attorney examining Jack Nicholson, who's on the stand. And Tom Cruise says, I just want the truth. And Jack Nicholson says, what? Come on. That's right. You can't handle the truth. Jesus says, you will know the truth and it will set you free. So who are you going to believe? Jack or Jesus? Because the truth is, yes, the truth will set you free, but it also might hurt. Can you handle it? Can you handle to speak the truth to someone else? Because the truth is, I desperately need you to speak the truth to me, and you desperately need me to speak the truth to you. And together we desperately need Jesus, who is the way and the truth and the life. And we desperately need Jesus, who is full of grace and truth. And we desperately need Jesus, who's the only one who's going to give us the courage and the wisdom and the strength to go out and speak the truth in love. And you know what? We're not always going to get it right. But if we check our motives and plan and think ahead about our presentation of what we're going to say, if we give affirmation to that person, and if we're willing to risk rejection, then odds are we're going to get it right most of the time. Because you see, love doesn't hide the truth or bury the truth or circumvent the truth or gloss over the truth. Love dares to speak the truth. So who do you love enough to speak the truth to this week?